So I'm just going to run through where we have got to in the program. So basically, these are the 7 elements. The first part is talking all about the nutrition, how nutrition and addiction are closely linked. So we've already done some bits of the first step formula. The second part of the process is looking at your relationship with food. The third part is about controlling cravings, what you need to eat, what you need to eliminate, how you do things. So this is the practical part of the course. What actually a healthy diet looks like, and particularly if you are a recovering addict. How your moods affect what you eat and how what you eat affects your moods. And then the money part of the program. So last time we took the first step formula, and the first thing we looked at was the explore part of this. So this was the wellness questionnaire that you should have filled in by now. So this is designed for you to keep a real accurate record of where you're starting your journey from and where you are finishing, or at least where you're finishing towards the end of this particular course. It's a really good idea to keep that with you and keep checking in every 6 months, every year, just to maintain your awareness of how you're feeling and what changes are occurring for you. Today, we're going to look at some evidence about food and addiction, some of the effects of addiction. And there's also the emotion piece. So by now, you will have seen the food and mood diary. And this is designed, as I say, for you to keep a record of your emotional state, your energy state after foods, after meals. So if you have a low, if you are particularly agitated, if you find yourself that your emotions are heightened or lowered, maybe that you can't sleep, maybe that you're getting angry, whatever it is, that's the moment that you go back to your food and mood diary, you chart how you are feeling, and then, more importantly, you chart what you have eaten. If anything, I want you to also write in there, I skipped lunch, or I skipped breakfast, or I skipped a snack. And this is a way for you to monitor the direct result or the direct effect that food is having on you. So addiction and emotion, addiction and energy in motion. So anything that has E in front of it is about energy. So what we know is that emotional distress, negativity, low mood is often the initial cause of an addiction or a habit. But that food and mood diary kind of turns that the other way around, because here we're looking at what you're eating and drinking and how that is impacting you in terms of your emotions, whether that's emotional distress, negatively, or low mood. So, it's about creating aha moments, really getting in tune with your body and understanding, oh, okay, yeah, that was, I just had, 3 biscuits, or I didn't have any breakfast, or I didn't have this, or I did have that, and this will become a pattern for you. Let's look at addiction. It's, you won't be the only person that feels guilty or shameful or feels that you're alone within your addiction. Most people are somewhere along the continuum in terms of addiction. Unless you're, the person that really lives a kind of monk or a saint-like life of abstinence in all senses, the majority of people will be somewhere along this continuum. So whether that substance that you're addicted to is caffeine, alcohol, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, whatever it is, or sugar, this continuum looks the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of explain to you what I mean by this. So if we look in terms of sugar, because this is what we're going to be talking about today, total abstinence from sugar, not many people do that, but actually abstinence from sugar is used very often in the sort of beneficial natural cures of cancer, for example. So we know that cancer feeds off sugar. Cancer cannot survive in an alkaline body, and it loves sugar. It feeds off it. It grows by it. And in fact, the way that they test for cancer in a lung cell is that they inject a cell, what looks like a cancerous cell, with sugar. And the way that it reacts tells them that actually that cell is cancerous. So we know that that sugar can be very harmful. But for some of us, and for most of us, actually, there are times when sugar is beneficial. You know, we need sugar, all the glucose, sucrose, fructose, anything that ends in an O's, dextrose, these are all sugars. And we need sugars, healthy sugars, because this is what gives us energy. This is what feeds our cells and gives us the energy to go about our daily lives, but also for the body to function normally. So beneficial sugars, the ones that we are getting from natural fruits or from whole grain cereals, for example, are the ones that are non-problematical. So that would be part of an everyday healthy looking diet. The bit where it becomes further along that continuum is when that sugar becomes potentially harmful, when it's in forms that are not so healthy for us. So you will be very aware of what I mean by that. So straightforward sugar, for example, and honey and agar syrup, all those things are still syrup. You know, people say to me, oh, you know, can I have agar syrup in my coffee, or can I have honey in my coffee or my tea or whatever it is? Well, you know, essentially all sugar is sugar. But I'm not only talking about sugar, and we will go through what I mean by sugary type foods. I'm talking about anything that converts to sugar and that you're consuming more than a healthy proportion of. This is when it becomes problematical, and then this is when this reliance on the benefits and the endorphins that you get from taking that substance, in this case sugar, becomes a substance misuse or a substance use disorder. And that's the point of addiction. So everything you think, feel and do, as well as everything you eat, drink or smoke, has a direct effect on your balance and on your brain function. And these are two quotes by a guy called Patrick Holford, who is a naturopath and very well respected, a natural doctor. And he says addiction, whether it be alcohol, tranquilizers, cigarettes or heroin, is less likely to occur in those that are well nourished. So as we introduced last time, what we know is that people that are in a position where they are nutrient lacking or lacking in nutrients, they are more likely to develop an addiction or a reliance on substances than people that are nutritionally sound. And the rub of this is that the more that your brain chemistry is out of balance, so in other words, you know, the direct effects on your balance and brain function, which is your neurotransmitters, the more these neurotransmitters or brain chemistry is out of balance, the more out of balance it will become as you expose yourself to potentially addictive substances. So this is kind of a loop, if you like. So in other words, let's just go back to here. So if you have a situation where you are creating potentially harmful associations with more than one thing, so it may be that your consumption of caffeine and cigarettes is non-problematical because it's very minor, but you have a potentially harmful relationship with sugar or heroin, that means it's more likely, because of the neurotransmitters in your brain, that the other substances move from a non-problematical point of view to a problematical point of view. And then you're not only battling the first addiction, but it's likely that you'll be battling the second and the third and the fourth, that is propping you up in order to try and help you to regain the feelings that you want, rather than just making you feel not unwell. So let's have a look at some of the effects of addiction. So for example, alcohol is one of the greatest anti-nutrients. So it depletes almost everything: vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and essential fats in the body. And we will be looking in much more detail about all these macro and micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and what they mean and how we can understand them. All types of addiction cause blood sugar problems. As we've just seen, the potential for any kind of addiction is higher to create other stimulant and drug dependence. So it's not uncommon for people who are addicted to one substance to, even if they come out of a rehab, to come out with a dependence on something else. It's more likely if you have an addiction that you will have food and chemical allergies and intolerances, that your thyroid will be underactive or overactive, out of whack, that you will suffer with heavy metal toxicity, that your immunity will be lower, that you will suffer with inflammatory things going on in your body. And in your wellness exercise that you did, you will be looking at things that are on the severe or moderate or frequent sides that are indications of this inflammatory process in your body. There will be serotonin deficiency, so those are the things that make you sleep, that help you sleep. Adrenal imbalances, so the adrenals sit on top of the kidneys and are the things that help us to manage stress. And acetylcholine imbalances as well, and I'll explain to you why that's important. Because all of these things cause these common experiences: difficulty concentrating, poor memory, that's the acetylcholine, by the way, mood swings, cravings, sleep issues. Any of those familiar? And this is a really interesting one, hypersensitivity, particularly in that kind of initial recovery period. Hypersensitivity to noise, touch, light, pain, stress. And studies have shown that people who have a hypersensitivity, so if there is, say, disruption in the household, maybe there's an alcoholic parent in the household, maybe they have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they will be hypersensitive, and by definition, genetically, may well be more predisposed to be looking towards substances that calm this hypersensitivity. So things like alcohol, for example. But what we also know is that in that immediate recovery phase particularly, is that recovering addicts sometimes experience that hypersensitivity too. All of a sudden, that drug has been taken away and all of their senses have been heightened. And of course, the body at this point is craving for this hypersensitivity to go away. Everything is amplified, you know, noise, pain, touch, and it just goes into overwhelm. It's fascinating, really, that illegal drugs are more harshly judged, you know, in terms of addiction. When you look at all the various different types of addiction, you know, those illegal drugs are much more harshly judged by, you know, on a global basis, and particularly here in the Western world. But if we look at the rationality and what is really going on, what we know is that one person dies every month from ease and amphetamines.
One person dies every day from heroin or methadone use.
One person dies every 20 minutes from alcohol or the associated complications of alcohol. This is in the UK, by the way, these are UK figures. But the legal ones, alcohol and smoking, one person dies every 4 minutes from the consequences of smoking. And the most fascinating thing is obesity, which is the biggest mega health trend of the 21st century, is actually the biggest health risk of all. And people tend not to feel guilty about smoking or feel guilty about eating or feel shame, you know, in the same way as their heroin or their amphetamine use or their alcohol use. But actually, realistically, you know, this is the same paradigm, this is the same continuum, and it's a society's view on it rather than actually what's going on in terms of ultimate morbidity. In other words, the likelihood that whatever it is, your drug of choice, whether it's sugar at one end and heroin at the other, is affecting the quality and the quantity of your life. So one of the things that we need to really address here is how we can eat to support you coming out of that addiction. And really it's about creating a balanced homeostasis, a body that is put back into a position where it can heal itself. So what we're talking about, creating this balance, is putting back the things that it's lost. You know, putting back the vitamins and minerals and the amino acids, putting back the essential fatty acids, making sure that there is enough sleep, making sure that the adrenals are under control. And a lot of this can be done by nutrition alone. As you know, this program also includes elements of mindset and meditation and breathing, and also, you know, how you look at yourself. But the majority of this, in terms of nutrition, is so powerful because it has such a dramatic effect on the body's ability to heal and overcome. So today, the most exciting part, really, I think, of this program so far is looking at one of the most important elements, because it is so closely related to an addiction that you either already have, or one that you are likely or more likely to experience from whatever your drug of choice is at the moment, and that is sugar. So what do I mean by sugar? So we've already said it's not just what the white stuff that comes in a tub, you know, it's not just that, it's any form of sugar. So anything, any food that converts in your bloodstream quickly into sugar. In other words, your body doesn't understand the difference between 5 teaspoons of sugar and a slice of white bread. It doesn't know that you've chewed it. It doesn't understand, because the nutrient value is not that different. But the sugar quantity is. So all it's looking for, your body is looking for the energy. And if you give it straightforward sugar in all of these forms, what happens is this imbalance and the creation of insulin, these insulin spikes, which I'm going to explain for you. So all of these things, including alcohol, of course, because, and this is why alcohol is this empty calorie, you know, alcohol is full of sugar, why particularly people who suffer with alcohol abuse, why their bodies in particular are so nutrient deficient, because, you know, they're getting their energy, they're getting their sugar from their alcohol. And very often diets and nutrition for alcoholics, you know, is a much bigger issue. So it's things that you're not necessarily going to think about that contain high amounts of sugar, that are sneaking into your diet, that otherwise you might otherwise miss. So for example, you know, this is a bottle of Heinz tomato soup. Other brands are available, by the way. So on the left hand side, you've got the bottle of Heinz soup, and on the right hand side, this is the amount of sugar that is in that bottle of Heinz ketchup. It's hidden. It's really sweet. It's got lots of salt in it as well, by the way. There is a low sugar version of this, which if you're going to use, then I would suggest you do that. But, you know, it's actually quite shocking that when you look at something that looks healthy, you know, it's bright red, it looks like fruit, or it looks like, well, yeah, tomatoes is a fruit. The underlying, if you begin to learn how to read labels, and this is a really important skill to develop, you'll begin to recognize the amount of sugars that we have in our processed foods. And of course, you know, this is no surprise that all of these things, you know, are unhealthy in terms of sugar, but also in terms of sort of, you know, not so healthy fats. But actually, it's not only the things that you would suspect, it's also the things that you wouldn't suspect. So, for example, these are marketed as healthy drinks. You know, they are on the shelves, come and have your, you know, your healthy smoothie for breakfast or whatever it is. But as you can see, here we have these drinks that range from 5 cubes of sugar, right up to 12 teaspoons of sugar for something which ostensibly looks healthy because it's green. Innocent, I think, by the way, is owned by Coca-Cola. So it's being much more aware as well that, you know, not all things are as they seem. So one of the most important things that we need to understand is how things have changed, particularly over the last, well, since the 1950s, really, something like that. You know, during the war, although there was a lot of austerity, people came out of the war, and actually they were some of the healthiest people that we've had on the planet because they weren't able to get sugar, and they were only able to get small amounts of fats and small amounts of, you know, kind of heavy proteins. But they did have access to eggs, and they had access to fruits and vegetables because they had to go and grow their own fruit and veg and, you know, use allotments. And so they would always start their day with something like eggs and bacon or eggs and tomatoes. That was the common thing for many, many years, until the production or the introduction of wheat cereals by the US. And the introduction of wheat has been completely tied to the rise in obesity, to type 2 diabetes, and to the rise in the mega health trends such as heart disease and strokes and cancer over the last 70 years. So with the introduction of wheat, there was this huge marketing campaign that persuaded everybody that instead of having eggs and bacon for breakfast, they should eat cereals and bread or toast. And, you know, when I was bringing my kids up, my eldest is now 30, I didn't know any better. You know, although I was trained as a nurse, I wasn't given any nutritional training whatsoever. And so I thought that this was quite a healthy breakfast. I never gave them chocolate cereals or the really high sugar ones, but I wouldn't think twice about giving them a bowl of cornflakes or some Rice Krispies. I mean, yes, they would have porridge in the wintertime, but this was a standard thing, or a piece of toast, you know, with some Marmite on it or whatever. Because I didn't know any better, because you don't know what you don't know. But actually, what I was doing was effectively, I could have just as easily been smashing up a packet of biscuits into a bowl, pouring milk over the top, and the amount of sugar and salt in their breakfast cereal was probably about the same as doing that. And so effectively what I was setting them up to do was to have this kind of blood sugar imbalance throughout their days. And of course, you know, we were doing the same thing as well. And when they were small, I was teaching at the time as a music teacher in their school. So I would get them up and I would feed them their breakfast. They would go a bit bonkers, big sugar rush, difficult getting out of the door because they'd be, you know, here, there and everywhere. Running around. By the time we got to the playground, all these kids whizzing around the playground, happy to see one another. I would then go home and go back to school for 10 o'clock, because that was when I started teaching music to them. And by then, all these kids are sitting with their head in their hands, you know, they're cross-legged, their energy is low, and totally switched off. Of course, they go into break, and they're given an apple nowadays, which is great, which boosts that blood sugar level, and off they go around into break. By lunchtime, you know, by mid-morning, their energy levels are low again until they're fed at lunchtime. And at lunchtime, like a lot of people, I would give them a sandwich and maybe a penguin biscuit and a fruity drink and maybe, you know, a few grapes, and off their blood sugar would go up again, until the time when they got home about 3:30, when they'd be as grumpy as hell. And of course I'd have to go in and pick them up with something. I wasn't the mum that took them to the sweetie shop. They only got sweeties on a Saturday, but you know, that's why mums take their kids to a sweetie shop after school, because they're unbearable, because their blood sugars are so low. So this is what happens to us as adults too. It isn't only them. So here we have this blood sugar chart in front of you. So where the yellow arrow is, that's the line at which we have a normal blood sugar, and say that's about 5. What happens is that we wake up in the morning and our stomach is full of hydrochloric acid and our blood sugar is really low. So because our stomach is full of hydrochloric acid, if we eat cornflakes or a piece of toast or whatever, it's able to digest that food really, really quickly, because the hydrochloric acid is most at its height at that time in the morning. So effectively, it's just like eating a bowl of sugar. And that sugar is delivered into the bloodstream really quickly, and that creates that first spike that you can see. So that's the kids, you know, by the time they get to the playground. Then what happens is your wonderful body, your pancreas, kicks out this amazing stuff called insulin, because there's a big warning sign that says, oh, this is dangerous. You know, we don't want our blood sugar to be up here. Warning, warning. And it kicks out insulin that brings the blood sugar down. But unfortunately, as you can see, that first dip, it brings it down below what is the normal level. And at that point, that's actually more dangerous. And if you're a diabetic of any sort and you've experienced a hypoglycemic incident, you'll know how dreadful you feel and actually how life-threatening that is. So at that point, your brain takes over and your body takes over, and it says, feed me. So at that point, you might be, you know, out for a walk, or you might be going to, you know, into a shop or into a cafe. That's the point when you're feeling, oh, my energy levels have gone. When you'll have a biscuit with your cup of tea or whatever it is. Off you go again. We've got this sugar rush going on. And this is the way that the blood sugar is perpetuated all day long. This massive fluctuation up and down all day long. This increases the levels of stress hormones, cortisol, in our body, those ones that are on top of the adrenals. And cortisol and insulin are like bedfellows. They love each other. And so ultimately what happens is that this high level of insulin means that your leptin levels stay low, which means that your ability to understand whether you are hungry or not stay low. And ultimately, this increased amount of cortisol decreases the ability for your cells to absorb the insulin, and they become insulin resistant. And insulin resistance, or pre-diabetes, is what leads ultimately into type 2 diabetes. So what is extraordinary is that most people, when they go to their GP with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, have no idea why this has happened to them. It is purely a lifestyle disease. It is one that is not genetic. It is one that is caused by making poor choices. Simple as that. And so what we need to be able to do is to educate people in generally in the population on how to control our blood sugars. But it is more critical if you have an addiction, because this continual fluctuation is so reminiscent of the fluctuations and the cravings that you are so used to experiencing. And so it might make sense to you that being able to control your blood sugar so that you're not on this roller coaster will help you to monitor and control your cravings for sugar, for food, and so that you can actually apply that into the way that you think about other things in your life too. So the other thing that happened, which kind of made us a nation that's fat, sick and unhappy, is that in the 1970s, a guy called Ansel Keys put out a piece of research that said that it's fat that's making us fat, and so that we should all go on low fat diets. I'm of an age when in the 1980s there was a lady called Rosemary Connolly who came along, and she developed a low fat diet. I can't remember what it was called, but you know, most of the women of my generation went on to low fat diets in the 1980s. But what happened was that the lowering of the fat in the diet increased the amount of sugar that needed to go into the food to make it palatable and to get people to buy it effectively. Because fat, particularly good fats, is what makes food taste amazing, and it's also what keeps us satiated. So it feeds keeps us full for longer. That's what satiation means. Sugar, on the other hand, you'll now see has the complete opposite effect, because the more sugar you eat, you get the highs and then you get the lows because of the effect of the insulin has on your body. So that's where the insulin resistance comes from. That's why we're getting such high rates of obesity in the Western world. And I'm recording this at a time when the COVID-19 virus is out, and the rising rates of COVID-19 cases and deaths are becoming obviously linked to obesity within those people who are suffering, particularly in the Western world. So all of this causes hormone disruption because we need good fats, and we are going to have a session on fats. We need good fats to be able to produce the hormones that are running the show. If we don't have enough fat in our bodies, our brain is made up of 80% fat, then we get brain fog. It means that our activity levels and our energy levels are much lower. So it means that high amounts of sugar create acidity in the body. So we need our bodies to be more alkaline than acid. Sugar completely turns that around and creates more acidity. As you know, cancer loves sugar because it loves acidity, and also that creates inflammation in the body. So if you filled out your your wellness assessment form and you have anything that is an itis, so tonsillitis, if you've got any kind of inflammatory thing going on, so maybe you've got infections, or maybe you've got your bowel is upset, or maybe you've got skin problems, all of this inflammatory picture is helped massively by reducing the amount of sugar that you're exposing your body to. Because this is really what we want it to look like. We want your foods to be able to release energy slowly. And that means that your glucagon levels stay balanced, which tell us when we're hungry and when we're not. And all of those foods means that we feel fuller for longer, and ultimately we eat less. So we're eating more healthily, but we are not eating to excess. And of course, if you're looking to control your weight, that's a big part of this, is controlling your blood sugars. So those leptin levels stay higher, tells us we're full. You know, our body's becoming much more in tune. We're getting that balance. The body's much more able to recognize, you know, really what's going on here. We also know that things like magnesium, we're going to talk about vitamins and minerals at some point. Magnesium helps the insulin transport sugar into the cells. And if you are a diabetic, then you really should be on a magnesium supplement. But the key to all of this is understanding how certain foods can control your blood sugar. So some of them have a high glycemic index and a high glycemic load. In other words, they have lots of sugar in them, and the way that they are absorbed into the body is really quick. That's high. Some of them have low index and low, which means that they are not particularly sugary, and the way that they are absorbed into the bloodstream is low too. And in this course, you're going to get access to the Harvard glycemic charts, which will give you a list of all the common foods. The high GI foods will have a value over 70, and these are all listed for you. And the low GI foods will have a list of under 55. So they're the green ones. So what we need to be able to do is to choose foods that are on the glycemic index of under 55. And then we need to choose foods that also have a slower glycemic load. So in other words, 10 or less. Certainly avoiding glycemic load foods that are over 15, but 11 to 14 we can kind of get away with. So what do I mean by this? What does that actually look like? So here we are. Here's the level. So if we look, for example, at the fourth one down, we look at white rice. So the glycemic index of white rice is 89. The middle one is just a portion size, by the way. And the glycemic load of white rice is 43. Can you see that? Now, if we compare that to brown rice, which is just 2 underneath that, Brown rice has a glycemic index of 50. So in other words, it's underneath that 55. And it has a glycemic load of just 16. So the difference between eating white rice, which converts to sugar really quickly, and brown rice, which will fill you up, keep you fuller for longer, because it converts to sugar much more slowly, is a very easy swap that all of us can do. And sometimes we might look at things that we think have a high glycemic load or are high sugar foods, but because of the fat content in them, they're actually not so bad for us. So if you go to the bottom and you look at ice cream, for example, so premium ice cream, rather than a low-fat ice cream, has a glycemic index of 38. And it only has a glycemic load of 3. So although you're sort of thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't be eating ice cream, actually a full-fat, really creamy, rich ice cream, if you eat it alongside something else, is actually better for you than if you were to eat, for example, something like, and this is really interesting because I see a lot of people doing this, something like a rice cake. So rice cakes are kind of marketed as a healthy food. So rice cake, some of them have got chocolate on the top. So if you look at a rice cake, the glycemic index of a rice cake is 82 and its glycemic load is 17. So both of those are above the threshold that we would like to have. And, you know, I do see mums giving these to their children as a snack, when actually they'd be much better choosing other things. Let's look at the other end of the scale here. So some of the most beneficial things is something like hummus, which is a chickpea salad dip. Most of you will know about hummus. And so this is one of the best superfoods that you can have in your fridge at all times, because it has a glycemic index of 6 and a glycemic load of nothing. Happy days! And if you combine that, rather than with a rice cake, but with an oat cake, for example, then actually that's going to give you a healthy, nutritious, satiating snack that will keep you going and keep your blood sugar levels. So what we need to be able to do as well is understand how we can combine foods so that we reduce the glycemic load. So let me see if I can explain that to you. So if you just have a banana, it will have a glycemic index and a glycemic load of its own. But if you add, say you have a piece of white toast with a banana, that's okay. But actually, if you swapped the white toast for brown toast or a wholemeal, really seeded loaf, and you put some peanut butter on that loaf and then some banana on the top, and then for you diabetics, you put some cinnamon on the top as well. Although you're getting the same amount of, you're getting all that nutrients, you're getting more nutrients, the fat content is a bit higher, but actually the glycemic index and the glycemic load is lower. Because the way the fat in the peanut butter slows down the way the banana and the bread goes into your bloodstream, means that you will be able to have that for breakfast and you will not feel hungry for lunch until lunchtime. If you were to just have the white bread with a low-fat spread on it with some banana on the top, chances are, an hour and a half later, you'd be hungry. So what we need to think about is how we combine these foods as well. It's not that you can never eat high glycemic load foods, but actually adding fat and protein to a meal in the right proportions means that you can balance your food out. So never go and just have one type. So for example, if we look at here, we've got the GIGL scale here. A banana is 4.5 teaspoons. So that's fairly healthy, isn't it? If we look at an orange, that's 5.5 teaspoons. Grapes are 5 teaspoons. So eating those kind of fruits, we were talking about the benefits of sugar and going into healthy type sugar. These are ways for you to eat a healthy amount of sugar. But if you compare that to the same amount in raisins, which are the dried fruit, we have 7.5, maybe, I don't know how much there's, 5, 6, 7, 6.5, 7.5 teaspoons of sugar in that small amount of raisins. And it's sometimes confusing because you think, oh, I'd rather give my child a little, sweet little packet of raisins, a little box of raisins like this, isn't that sweet? But actually that glycemic index is really low. And to be honest, you just as well be giving your kids, a packet of sweets. So let's look at the glycemic index and load. A banana, 62 and 16. Remember, we're looking at under 55 and under 10, preferably. 59 and 11, we're getting there. Orange is your best option because we're underneath both of those thresholds for both of them. But, look where the sultanas are. They are not only sugary, but the way that they are delivered into your system is high. And this is what is causing the problem. If you were to eat some nuts with that though, a protein, or maybe some peanut butter, anything that has protein in it, it would bring down that glycemic index or glycemic load. It would bring down the rate at which you went into your system. This is a really good way of looking at this in your breakfast cereal. So for example, your breakfast cereal has 5.5 teaspoons of sugar in it. And this is a Sultana brand one. So it's got oats, which are really good, slowly released. It's got nuts, slowly released. It's got no sugar in it. And it's got natural sugars in the fruits. If you had just a nut only bran or oat breakfast, then the glycemic index and the glycemic load would be even lower, wouldn't it? Because you just know now, you've seen that raisins, sultanas, those kind of fruits are really high. Anything like that, apricots, are all high on the scale. But even so, if you compare that to your cornflakes, your sultana bran, even with the fruit in it, is much better than a bowl of cornflakes, which is way up there at 93 and 23. So let's look at this. I think this is really fascinating. So your brown bread has 12 grams of sugar in it, 2 grams of fiber in it, and it has a glycemic index of 70. So that's just if you eat that bit of that bread. However, not that I'm recommending that you eat a Snickers bar, but this gives you the kind of idea that your Snickers bar not only has carbohydrate in it, in the form of, the mallow or whatever, it also has good fats in it, or it has some fats in it, some of which is a peanut, because it has peanuts in it, doesn't it? And protein in the peanut. And it will have some fats in the chocolate. Not the healthiest of fats, but you can see here, not that I want you to swap your Snickers bar for some toast, but actually by combining things in foods, this brings down the glycemic index and glycemic load. So here on the left-hand side, you can reduce the glycemic load of this piece of bread, as I said, by putting a healthy fat on it. So a really, really good quality butter rather than a sunflower oil or, something that a margarine, which they're not really food, or just spreading them with a nut butter, having a bit of banana on there and sprinkling with something like cinnamon is really good. So let's just take one look again at the rice picture. So, we want you to be able to go out and eat. We want you to have, a nice life. This isn't about choosing to live like a monk and being in that abstinence world. But there are ways in which you can eat at home and in ways that you can make better choices out and about. And this is one of the simplest choices. We talked about this, the difference between white and brown rice. So glycemic index 89, load is 43. Just the same as having, 10 teaspoons of sugar. However, if you're out and about and you get the opportunity, 55 and 50 and 10, remember, between 11 and 14 is okay. We're still on the high side at 16, but it's much, much better for you to have brown rice than it is for you to have the white rice. How does this look in reality? Well, alcohol is included here because I know that not everybody has an alcohol addiction, and so some of you still might be choosing to have alcohol. But just by changing up two things on this particular plate. So on the left-hand side, you have a salad, some red wine, some salmon, some broccoli, and some white potatoes. Glycemic index is 80, glycemic load is 32. On the right hand side of the screen, you have everything that's the same, except instead of the white potatoes, it is sweet potato, and instead of red wine, it is white wine. And so this has brought down the glycemic index and the glycemic load. And this is going to be a much healthier and more sustainable, more filling and fulfilling meal for you. So what we're doing here, the basis of glycemic index and glycemic load, controlling your blood sugar, controlling your cortisol levels, because remember, being on this roller coaster is increasing the stress levels, increasing cortisol. In turn, that helps you to balance your hormones, particularly insulin, and ultimately that will also help you to manage your weight if that's what you want to do. So here, this is the kind of plate that you should be looking at. We're going to go more into the types of foods, and we're going to be giving you menus and recipes to look at. But this is a really good visual way of thinking about how you should eat in terms of what's on your plate in front of you. It's a very simple visual clue. So in the top half, obviously, we've got proteins on the left-hand side. As you look at it, eggs, seafood, lentils, beans, soy or poultry, meat, low-fat dairy produce. Not quite so keen on the low-fat, actually. I didn't notice that. On the right-hand side, wheat, bread, pasta, starchy vegetables, parsnips and swedes. So starchy vegetables, parsnips, swedes, squashes, things like that. They're starchy vegetables. So they're in the carbohydrate area, even though they are vegetables. Potatoes, and I would put sweet potatoes in there rather than ordinary potatoes. Rice would be brown rice. I'm going to talk about things like barley and quinoa. And then in the bottom, the half of your plate should be made up of all the sorts of green vegetables. So in other words, not the starchy ones, but all the green and things like carrots and mushrooms and tomatoes as well on top of that.